We have reached the end of chapter 3, and if you missed class, these are the terms we went over today. Now, friendly reminder, if you want to get a 3, 4, or a 5 on the exam in May, please keep your content terms up to date. Review them periodically. The more reps you put in, the more success you're going to have. I know I sound like a coach, but I am a coach, and I know it to be true. So anyway, chapter 3 focused a lot on the trade routes, and the big one, the first one, was the Silk Road. Now, the Silk Road went from Han China to Rome. Now, I know a lot of people, they hear the word road and they're thinking of 8 Mile or Middle Belt or Telegraph or whatever. It's not like that, okay? It was a network that connected people, and there were middlemen along the way, the Kushan and the Parthian being the two biggest middlemen. And if you don't know what a middleman is, it's very simple. You buy something and you sell it to somebody else for a profit. Still profitable today, it was then. But the Silk Road also facilitated ideas and religion and disease and love and hate and all those, when human beings interact, all those things can happen. And the Silk Road facilitated all this to have these increased hemispheric interactions. But notice the Silk Road is land-based, whereas the Indian Ocean trade route is naval-based. So boats became hugely important at this time. Like the Silk Road, all that cultural diffusion took place. But what happened were these coastal cities became incredibly profitable, incredibly important. A lot of them are still profitable and important. And you can see how elaborate this network was. And the third of them was the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, West Africa. Okay. So Ghana, Mali, and Songhai were the three big West African empires. Chief commodity, gold and salt. Those were the two main commodities, and there's others. Now, in addition to those commodities and that trading, Islam spread very quickly throughout those two. And I mentioned it in a prior chapter. It also created the richest human being to ever live, Mansa Musa, who was part of the Mali Empire. So very successful. So you put those together, Silk Road, Indian Ocean Trade Network, Trans-Saharan Trade Network. These were the things keeping the world flowing, keeping people mixing. And when people mix, new outcomes happen. That I promise you. So similarities. Number one, they all increased hemispheric interactions. Big point. Point number two, they all made the Afro-Eurasian world zone more prominent. 3, cultural diffusion and collective learning occurred along all 3 of these routes. 4, certain empires emerged as powerful due to their success along these trade routes. And 5, increased technology through the need to handle the logistics of travel and banking and interacting with each other. It really created improved technology. Really important. Big points there. Okay, so anyway, the magnetic compass, one of the 4 great inventions of China. Now, we already learned about the Song dynasty, and the magnetic compass was one of the 4. Paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass. So think of it like this. If you and I were to take a road trip to New York City, and you had your GPS and I had nothing, who's going to have a better trip? Okay. So those who had the compass were like the people who had GPS. They're going to have a better trip, more accurate, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, lateen sail. Now, I know most of us aren't sailors. Okay. I know very few of my students are sailors. But if you look at this sail, it's a really unique design, okay? Now, those who used the lateen sail were able to have more success when they were on those naval routes, okay? It was able to have more speed, more stability. And again, it's like a new technology. When you get it and other people don't have it, okay, you're going to have more success. If you have the new iPhone, whatever it is, 38, that makes you pancakes and rubs your back, it does everything. The latest model compared to somebody with a flip phone, okay, the new iPhone is going to beat the flip phone, if you get that. So lateen sail, that was the key piece of technology along those naval routes. Now, the stern post rudder. There it is. There is a stern post rudder. Now, it was invented in China during the Han Dynasty, and then eventually it became better known over time. And for a boat to move, the rudder is hugely important, okay? And there's all sorts of designs for rudders. As a matter of fact, a little aside, the big sailing race, the America's Cup, America had won that for like 130-something years, and the Australians came out with a brand new rudder, and they won. So it goes to show you how important a rudder is on a ship, and those who had it were able to get around that Indian Ocean trade network. Now, for those who were not, sailing those Silk Road routes, a lot of it went through these very difficult terrains, the Gobi Desert and, very vast, empty terrain. The camel and the horse, they were king. Okay, the camel and the horse was the truck and the car of a long time ago. Okay, that was the means to get through this. So a camel is great, very sturdy, very strong, can go a great distance without water. Horses are fantastic, very quick, and all that sort of thing. So these land routes would not exist and be successful without the camel and the horse. Okay, if you don't get this, take the trucks and the cars off the highway. How useful is that highway at that point? Okay, you get it? Okay, now Xi'an, China, this was the eastern part of the Silk Road. And again, the hubs where along these trade routes became really important. Lots of people, lots of cultural diffusion, mixing, lots of money, okay? So Xi'an, China was the eastern end of the Silk Road. Now, Calicut was a prime example of a city that became very wealthy and important because of that route, okay? So this was actually the site of Vasco da Gama's first landfall in India. In fact, this region, the Goa region of India, still has a lot of Portuguese flavor in the mix. So the point of these cities, if you were a stop on the Indian Ocean Trade Network, or you're a stop on any of the trade networks, you became a big deal. You became an important place. Okay, to give you a modern parallel to that, take America. Okay, what really makes America America? It's our big cities, okay? Detroit, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. We don't talk about, Chickens Knuckle, Kansas. We talk about the big major cities. That's what keeps us flowing. That's what keeps us going. Okay, now Srivijaya was an empire that was really geographically in a great position to be along the Indian Ocean trade network. Because you can see it's a kind of a place to go to China, you can go to India, you can go to the Middle East, and they became very profitable, very important simply because of their geographic location and their connection to the trade route. Okay, now Timbuktu. This is, essentially a West African example of an important city. So what Calicut was to the Indian Ocean trade route, Timbuktu was to the Trans-Saharan trade route, okay? Now, the differences between the trade routes here, you can see this is pretty much Afro-Eurasia, the whole thing. But some of it is land, some of it is West African, some of it is Europe to Asia. But this visual, it's a very busy visual. It was important. And if you look at these commodities that were going along, commodity, if you don't know what a commodity is, it's any physical item that can be bought and sold. That's all it is. But people, these are multi-billion-dollar industries. Multi-billion-dollar industries. They still are. Okay. And the religions and, obviously some religions took place or took hold in some places, other religions. That's a story for another day. Okay. Now, when you look at some of these religions that kind of got moved around or got settled, I should probably say, along these routes, Buddhism is a big one, okay? Now, there are a couple different types of Buddhism. Now, this is the Mahayana Buddhism that asserts that enlightenment can be attained through meditation, self-contemplation, intuition, rather than faith and devotion. It's practiced in China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Okay, now the Bantu people, they adopted Islam. So the Bantu people, Islam really clicked with them. And it's, Islam settled on the Trans-Saharan. A lot of Buddhism on the Indian Ocean trade network. A lot of Islam and Christianity along the Silk Road. That sort of thing. Hey, you're noticing that religion has a big part of history by now? Yeah, I'm thinking. A little aside there. Okay. Now, part of the Indian Ocean trade network were the Eastern African, the Great Zimbabwe, and a language emerged, the Swahili language. So Swahili is a language in East Africa here, and it was spoken by people on the Indian Ocean trade network. And like today, if you want to do international business, you better learn the languages of the people you're going to do business with, and Swahili was one of those languages. Now, Ibn Battuta, interesting guy. The most traveled guy of the time. I don't know if you know who Anthony Bourdain was. He passed away, but he traveled everywhere, the whole world, and interacted with people. He's kind of the Anthony Bourdain of a long time ago. And he left for his Hajj, was one of the 5 pillars of Islam, at 20. Then he traveled for 29 years, covered 75,000 miles, 44 modern countries. Now, his accounts provide excellent historical records of the world at that time. So really valuable resource. Interesting life. Very, very cool life, Ibn Battuta. Now, Marco Polo, here's a classic, trade route guy. Marco Polo is an Italian guy, goes and hangs out with the Yuan dynasty, Kublai Khan, when the Mongols controlled China, and he learned from them. He comes back to Italy, writes a book, and people in Europe learned about what's going on in Asia, and that inspired some of them to go to Asia to mix with them. So Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, there's these key figures that gave accounts to the way the world was, but they also encourage people to travel, because if you read their accounts, if you have any wanderlust in you, you want to hit the road. Okay, so it wasn't all good. There were environmental consequences along the trade route, because when people want to make profits, the environment is kind of secondary. So sometimes when people are trying to make a buck, especially with agricultural commodities, they would cut the forest down. Or if you're trying to make your money off of livestock, you would cut the forest down. Also, when you mix with people, you might have a disease they have not been exposed to. When they get exposed to it, they get really, really sick. Now, we all lived through the COVID pandemic. And remember when they tried to prevent the COVID pandemic, put a mask on, stay home, don't interact with each other? Because here's the thing, when you interact, you can get sick. And if your immune system is weak or weaker than the person you're dealing with, all sorts of things. Now, the biggest being the bubonic plague in 1347. I mean, that was a horror show. And that was actually hugely important to some future historical events, but that's for another day. So those were the terms from chapter 3. I'm repeating myself, but, I'm going to keep your content repository up to date and review it, and you'll thank me in the next summer when you get a 3, 4, or 5 on your exam. So thank you for watching.